Today, Puerto Rico is connected to the United States. But before America, before Spain, and before European colonization, another civilization called this island home.
Long before Europeans arrived, Puerto Rico was home to the Taínos, an indigenous people who had built communities across the Caribbean. The Taíno lived from farming, fishing, hunting, and trade. Their world was built around the island's rivers, forests, and coastline.
Taíno communities were organized into different territories, often led by powerful chiefs known as caciques.
For centuries, this was the world of Puerto Rico. Then, in 1493, European ships appeared on the horizon, and the island's history was about to change forever.
In 1493, Christopher Columbus returned to the Caribbean on his second voyage, and Puerto Rico was about to enter European history. When the Spanish arrived, they encountered the Taíno people, who had lived on the island for generations. The Spanish crown soon claimed the island, beginning a relationship with Puerto Rico that would last for more than 4 centuries. Juan Ponce de León became one of the key figures in the early Spanish colonization of Puerto Rico, helping establish a permanent Spanish presence on the island. Spanish settlement grew, and the town that would become San Juan began to develop into a strategic center of Spanish power in the Caribbean. Puerto Rico's location made it incredibly valuable. Sitting at the entrance to the Caribbean, the island became a key stop for Spain's growing American empire. Spanish ships carrying wealth from the Americas crossed these waters. Controlling Puerto Rico meant controlling an important piece of the route back to Europe. San Juan grew around the harbor, attracting soldiers, merchants, settlers, and ships. But Spain knew the city needed something stronger than walls made of wood. Spain began building massive fortifications around San Juan. The goal was simple: make the island almost impossible to take. El Morro would eventually become one of the most famous fortresses in the Caribbean. And soon, Spain would have to prove whether its walls could really protect Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico's importance did not go unnoticed. As Spain's rivals expanded across the Caribbean, San Juan became a tempting target. In 1595, the English commander Sir Francis Drake led a major expedition against San Juan. The English fleet attacked San Juan, but the fortress and its defenders turned the harbor into a deadly obstacle.
San Juan survived. The fortress had done exactly what Spain built it to do: protect the island from foreign attack.
By the 17th century, San Juan had become more than a colony. It was one of Spain's most important military strongholds in the Caribbean. After repeated threats, San Juan became one of Spain's strongest military positions in the Americas. But the biggest battles for Puerto Rico were still centuries away.
Behind the fortress walls, ordinary life continued. San Juan became a growing colonial city, shaped by Spanish culture, trade, religion, and migration.
Puerto Rico's economy increasingly depended on agriculture, especially sugar. But the colonial economy also depended heavily on enslaved African labor. Over generations, Puerto Rico developed its own society, a mixture of indigenous, African, Spanish, and other Caribbean influences. For more than 4 centuries, and eventually, some began asking a dangerous question: should Puerto Rico remain Spanish forever? By the late 18th century, new political ideas were spreading across the Atlantic. Ideas about liberty, rights, and independence were beginning to reach Puerto Rico. Revolutions in America and France showed that powerful empires could be challenged. Soon, similar ideas would transform the Spanish world. Across Spanish America, colonies began fighting for independence. But Puerto Rico remained under Spanish rule, surrounded by countries that were breaking away. Among the strongest voices for Puerto Rican independence was Ramón Emeterio Betances, who believed the island should break free from Spanish colonial rule. In 1868, Puerto Rican rebels launched the Grito de Lares, a major rising against Spanish rule. The rebellion was quickly defeated, but the desire for change did not disappear.
The uprising failed, and Spanish authorities quickly regained control. But the rebellion had shown that the demand for change was no longer a fringe idea. In 1873, slavery was abolished in Puerto Rico. It was a transformation that changed the island forever. Political reform also began to grow. Puerto Rican leaders pushed for greater representation and more control over the island's own affairs. In 1897, Spain granted Puerto Rico a charter of autonomy, giving the island greater control over its own government.
For a moment, Puerto Rico seemed to be moving toward greater self-governance.
The next year, a war between Spain and the United States would change everything. By early 1898, tensions between Spain and the United States had reached a breaking point. Cuba was at the center of the crisis, but Puerto Rico was about to become part of the same war. Newspapers demanded action. "Remember the Maine" became a powerful rallying cry, and public pressure for war grew rapidly. On February 15, 1898, the USS Maine exploded in Havana Harbor, killing more than 260 American sailors. American anger towards Spain exploded with it. In April 1898, the United States declared war on Spain. Now the conflict was no longer just about Cuba. It was about Spain's remaining empire in the Caribbean. Once war began, the United States turned its attention toward Puerto Rico. After more than 4 centuries of Spanish rule, an American fleet was now heading straight for the island. On July 12, 1898, the American fleet reached Puerto Rico. The invasion had begun.
Spanish troops were outnumbered and faced an American military force that was determined to take control of the island.
American troops came ashore and began moving inland. Spanish forces prepared to defend the island. Unlike the massive battles of Europe, much of the campaign in Puerto Rico consisted of smaller clashes as American troops pushed inland. Puerto Rico was only one part of a much larger crisis. Spain was fighting to hold on to the last major pieces of an empire that had once stretched across the world. And now, the American forces continued moving across Puerto Rico, taking control of more territory as Spanish resistance weakened. Spanish commanders could see what was happening. Their forces were increasingly isolated, and the campaign was becoming impossible to reverse. Then, in August 1898, Spain and the United States agreed to an armistice. The fighting stopped. But the political future of Puerto Rico had already changed. For Puerto Rico, the meaning was enormous. After more than 400 years, the Spanish flag was coming down. In 1898, Puerto Rico passed from Spanish rule to American control. But that was only the beginning of the island's most complicated chapter. After the war, Puerto Rico was no longer governed by Spain. The United States established a military government and began reshaping the island's political system. For ordinary Puerto Ricans, the change was visible everywhere. New uniforms, a new flag, and a new power now occupied the streets of San Juan. The Treaty of Paris, signed in December 1898, officially ended the war. Spain ceded Puerto Rico to the United States. 4 centuries of Spanish rule were officially over. Puerto Rico was now an American territory. But unlike a state, the island did not become part of the United States on equal constitutional terms. Puerto Rico had changed hands, but one enormous question remained. Was Puerto Rico supposed to become American, or should it eventually become something else? In 1900, the Foraker Act created a civilian government for Puerto Rico. The island was entering a new political system, but it still had limited control over its own affairs. Puerto Rico was becoming politically American, while remaining culturally distinct. The island now had to navigate 2 identities at once. In 1917, the Jones-Shafroth Act granted U.S. citizenship to people born in Puerto Rico. But citizenship did not automatically make Puerto Rico a state. With U.S. citizenship came new responsibilities as well. Puerto Ricans served in the American military, including during World War I. Puerto Ricans were now American citizens, but Puerto Rico was still a territory, and that unusual status would shape the island's future for generations. American rule had changed Puerto Rico, but political debate was far from over. Many Puerto Ricans wanted greater control over their own government. Three visions gradually emerged: becoming a U.S. state, becoming independent, or keeping some form of territorial relationship with America. During the 1940s, a new political vision gained influence in Puerto Rico. Instead of choosing immediate independence, its supporters argued for reshape Puerto Rico's political future. During the 1940s and 1950s, Puerto Rico underwent rapid economic transformation through a program, Operation Bootstrap, shifting the economy toward manufacturing and industry. In 1952, Puerto Rico adopted its own constitution and became known as the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico. But the new status did not, or was it still a U.S. territory? In 1952, Puerto Rico's new constitution came into effect, creating the political system that still defines the island today. The new arrangement created a closer political relationship with the United States, while giving Puerto Rico its own local government.
But this created a complicated question. Was Puerto Rico now part of the United States? Was it self-governing, or was it still a territory? From this point forward, Puerto Rico's political debate would revolve around three possibilities: statehood, independence, or some form of continued relationship with the United States.
And the debate was no longer about Spain. It was about Puerto Rico's future with America. For decades, voters would return to the same question: what should Puerto Rico become? After the creation of the Commonwealth, Puerto Rico's political debate became more complicated than ever. Different groups had very different ideas about what the island should become.
For supporters of statehood, the argument was straightforward. Puerto Ricans were already American citizens, so Puerto Rico should have the same political status as the states. For independence supporters, the answer was completely different. Puerto Rico, they argued, should become a sovereign country and control its own destiny. Others believed Puerto Rico should keep its existing relationship with the United States while maintaining its own local government and cultural identity.
Eventually, the debate moved from political speeches to the ballot box.
Puerto Ricans would repeatedly be asked to decide, but the results would never completely end the debate.
In 1967, Puerto Ricans voted in a major status referendum. The Commonwealth option won, while statehood and independence received far fewer votes. But the result did not end the argument. The problem was simple to describe, but difficult to solve. Statehood, independence, and the existing relationship, Puerto Ricans remained divided over which future was best. Puerto Rico's future was not controlled by the island alone. Congress in Washington also had enormous power over the territory's political status. That made the question even more complicated. Puerto Ricans are U.S. citizens, but Puerto Rico does not have voting representatives in the Senate or House like a state does. That unusual political arrangement is one of the reasons the status debate has lasted so long. For generations, Puerto Rico has existed in a political space unlike any U.S. state. That brings us to the question that still remains today. Why is Puerto Rico?
By the late 20th century, a new generation had inherited the same political question. Should Puerto Rico remain as it was, become a state, or become independent?
In 1993, Puerto Ricans voted again on their political status. The result was extremely close, showing just how divided the island remained over its future.
5 years later, Puerto Rico voted again. But the result was even more complicated, with no single traditional status option receiving a clear majority. The debate continued.
In 2012, another referendum produced a major shift in the political debate. A majority of voters rejected continuing the existing territorial arrangement in the first gen politically contested. In 2017, another referendum produced a large majority for statehood among those who voted, but turnout was low and the result was disputed by opponents. So even after decades of in 2020, Puerto Rico held another referendum. This time, voters were asked a direct question about statehood. Statehood received a majority of the votes cast. But here's the crucial part. A Puerto Rican referendum doesn't turn the island into a state. Any change in Puerto Rico's political status requires action by the U.S. federal government and Congress. Ultimately, Congress has the power to determine the territory's political status under federal law. And that is one of the biggest reasons Puerto Rico remains in the same political position today. Economics also complicates the debate. Supporters of different political options disagree over taxes, federal programs, trade, investment, and what each possible status would mean for Puerto Rico's economy. But Puerto Rico's debate isn't only about politics or economics. It's also about national identity. And that may be the most complicated part of all.
Puerto Rico's identity doesn't fit neatly into one category. Many Puerto Ricans see themselves as deeply Puerto Rican, and that dual identity is central to the island's political debate.
Spanish remains the dominant language of everyday life in Puerto Rico. That cultural connection helps explain why many residents see their identity distinct from the mainland United States. And Puerto Rico's story isn't limited to the island. Millions of people of Puerto Rican heritage live across the United States. Cultural and economic connections between the island and the mainland.
Every time Puerto Rico's status comes back to the political spotlight, the same reality remains. The island can vote on what it wants, but Congress ultimately has to decide what happens next. More than a century has passed since Spain lost Puerto Rico. Yet the basic question remains unresolved. So why is Puerto Rico still part of America? The key to understanding Puerto Rico is this: it is a U.S. territory, not a state. That means Puerto Rico is under American sovereignty, but it does not have the same constitutional status as a state. Under the U.S. Constitution, Congress has broad authority over America's territories. That means Puerto Rico's ultimate political status cannot be changed by the island alone. Even when Puerto Ricans vote for statehood, the vote itself does not automatically create a new state. Congress would still have to approve the change through federal legislation. Independence would be an even more dramatic change. It would mean Puerto Rico becoming a sovereign country rather than remaining under U.S. sovereignty. Political transition. Why is Puerto Rico still a territory? It has been part of America since 1898, but its ultimate political future remains undecided. Connect to Congress to learn more. The 21st century arrived, but Puerto Rico's political question came with it. After more than 100-year American sovereignty, the island still had no final political status. In 2017, Hurricane Maria, Puerto Rico, the disaster exposed not only the island's infrastructure problems, but also renewed arguments over its relationship with the United States. The response also raised a deeper question. How should a U.S. territory receive federal support? And what does that relationship really mean when a disaster strikes? As political debates intensified, the three major visions became increasingly clear.
Independence?
Or keeping the existing relationship, and none could completely silence the others. Puerto Rico's political debate has survived wars, constitutional changes, economic transformation, because beneath every referendum fundamental question: what should Puerto Rico be? If Puerto Rico became a state, the island would become part of the United States on the same constitutional footing as the other states. But what would that actually change? Statehood would also mean full representation in Congress. Puerto Rico would have voting senators and representatives, rather than its current limited representation. Statehood would also change the relationship with the federal tax system and federal programs. But the exact economic consequences would depend on the laws Congress adopted during the transition.
But political status would not erase Puerto Rico's culture. Spanish, Puerto Rican traditions, music, food, family connections, relationship, not erase the island's identity.
Independence would create an entirely different future. Puerto Rico would become a sovereign country, responsible for its own government, international relations, and national policies.
Under independence, Puerto Rico would become a sovereign country. It would no longer be a U.S. territory, and its government would have complete authority over island's domestic and international affairs.
Independence would also give Puerto Rico control over its own foreign policy. The island could negotiate international agreements and establish diplomatic relationships as a sovereign nation. Puerto Rico would have to manage its own fiscal policy, trade relationships, and economic strategy. The exact outcome would depend heavily on the terms of any transition. But political independence would not erase Puerto Rico itself. The language, families, traditions, music, food, and culture would remain. The biggest change would be political sovereignty. But there is a third possibility. Puerto Rico could continue its relationship with the United States without becoming a state or becoming independent. And that more than a century has passed since Puerto Rico became a U.S. territory. Generations have grown up under the same political relationship, and yet the final question has never been settled. Today, fundamental choices remain: statehood,
Independence,
or continuing the relationship. Future Puerto Rico, deciding which future Puerto Rico wants and what the United States will approve. That's why the debate isn't simply about choosing a flag. Each option would affect representation, economics, citizenship, government, and Puerto Rico's relationship with the United States. There is no simple answer. And this is the crucial point. Puerto Rico can express what its voters want. Fundamental political status requires action at the federal level. That is why the debate has continued for so long. Connected for more than a century, Puerto Rico's status remains unresolved, or the status quo, its future is still unwritten. A question they must settle together.